Hi there, it's John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a final factor to Hitler's rise to power, and with a number of things for you to think about regarding his consolidation of power too. You do also need to go back and consider just how much Hitler was helped into power. There was the financial backing given to the Nazi Party by the likes of Fritz Thyssen, the steel manufacturer who had played a leading part in the passive resistance to the French and Belgian occupation of the Ruhr in 1923, and Gustav Krupp, who provided much of Germany's war machine in World War I and would do so again in World War II. And Alfred Hugenberg, the wealthy owner of various media outlets and leader of the German National People's Party, who had allowed the Nazis to print anti-Weimar articles in his newspapers. And note, by the way the old traditional elite always had a presence in Weimar, the old right, always trying to undermine it. Topics overlap. But it's the intrigue of the traditional right, the traditional elite, that opened the door for Hitler in the Depression years. And something I would add here, it was these guys that we're going to mention who brought an end to Weimar democracy, not Hitler. Heinrich Brüning, appointed by President Hindenburg in March 1930 on the advice of Kurt von Schleicher, was the first. And though his government lasted a little over 2 years until May 1932, it governed largely by presidential decree. And a few words on decrees. In 1930, Hindenburg issued just 5 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed 98 laws. Contrast that with 1931, when Hindenburg issued 44 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed 34 laws. And contrast that with 1932, when Hindenburg issued 66 decrees, whilst the Reichstag passed just 5 laws. That's why this period is known as presidential government. After Brüning came Franz von Papen, and now we're really in the end game. His government, known as the Cabinet of Barons because it didn't have a single member of the Reichstag in it, only lasted 169 days. He was replaced as Chancellor by Schleicher, but he only lasted 56 days. Von Schleicher, the power behind the throne before taking it himself, was from a noble family and was an officer in Hindenburg's regiment. He was a confidant of President Hindenburg and his son, Otto Hindenburg, who was himself close to his father. Hindenburg was appointing chancellors despite what the Reichstag might have thought about them. Presidential government again, but was forced to sack them when they couldn't get any legislation passed, forcing him instead to issue decree after decree. Papen even suggested abolishing the Weimar Constitution, ruling by decree, as if he wasn't doing so already, and using the army to crush any opposition. But von Schleicher, at that point the Minister of Defence, warned Hindenburg that this might lead to civil war. He advised the President that the army had lost confidence in Papen, and that he should dismiss him and replace him with himself. And this is why I argue that Weimar democracy ended before Hitler came to power. So Hindenburg now turned to Schleicher, who tried to put a broad coalition together, covering the whole political spectrum from left to right. Schleicher even negotiated with Strasser, the prominent Nazi, hoping he could bring pressure to bear on Hitler to join his coalition. If not, he hoped to detach Strasser from Hitler and bring him and his fellow left-leaning National Socialists into the coalition with him. He went as far as to offer Strasser the vice-chancellorship and the premiership of Prussia. But he failed, and without the support of the Reichstag, Schleicher was forced to resign. It was now Pappen's turn to conspire against Schleicher. Pappen, having met with leading politicians, major landowners, industrialists and army leaders, again note the traditional rights involvement, suggested to Hindenburg that if Hitler was appointed Chancellor at the head of a coalition with himself as Vice-Chancellor, they would be able to govern, whilst Hitler would be kept under control. It was thought that decisions would be made by the cabinet, where the Nazis would be in a minority, and Hitler would be able to get the support of the Reichstag to get the decisions made by the cabinet passed into law. That was the plan anyway. So, reluctantly, on January the 30th, 1933, Hindenburg appointed Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Now note that I've used a narrative in this section. The story is important, it's often important, but only if you make its significance clear. Weimar democracy was dead before Hitler, and Hitler was helped into power by the traditional elite, who were always undermining Weimar. So, Hitler's position in 1933. As for Hitler's consolidation of power, you have to first consider Hitler's position in 1933. What made him appear weak in the eyes of von Papen and others? And also, what he had that he could use to his advantage. You need to do this because you might get a question on it. But you can't properly understand how he was able to consolidate power if you don't. So make sure you are strong on this. There's not a lot to it. The Nazis were in a minority in the cabinet. PR would continue to work against them in the Reichstag, and a 2/3 majority was required to make any changes to the constitution. But the Nazis were still the biggest party. They held cabinet posts and they would use these to their advantage. They actually held some key cabinet posts. The Nazis also had the SA, which, with a membership of around 2.5 million, was considerably larger than the army. Besides, the old guard needed Hitler, and the Nazis more than they needed the old guard. And ultimately, the Nazis had the key factor: Hitler. So, how did Hitler consolidate power? Remember, you are preparing for what happened questions, as well as why questions and discussions or debates. With that in mind, I used the notes framework that you see on this slide. But also prepare for possible questions on Gleichschaltung, both with respect of what it meant and separating what happened from the other ways in which power was consolidated. so that the purge of the civil service, the crushing of free trade unions, the end of independent state parliaments, the banning of other parties, and the coordination of social life are all parts of Gleichaltung, but not the other stuff on my slide. And make sure you pay particular attention to the Night of the Long Knives. It's a popular exam question, and it has particular significance to Hitler's consolidation. Not just because it once and for all asserts his control over the Nazi Party, but because it also appeases the traditional elites. And so I will leave you with one of the notes frameworks that I rely on so much. I analyse past questions and I make sure my frameworks cover whatever can be thrown at my students in the exam. My ebooks are based around them, and with the different frameworks I think I have it covered. I certainly hope so. But that's it for this presentation. I do wish you luck in your exam. I do wish you luck with your revision before it. But before I go, I will, as always, thank you for listening. Cheers.